The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, Ph.D. It is Thursday, the 30th of July, 2026. And I'm going to bring on now Dr. Brian Hooker because we have some actually sad news for you this morning. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. Polly, I am such a fan of the Neuenschwanders, and I just want to announce, I think a lot of people have seen the written obituary in The Defender. Trish Neuenschwander, passed away over the weekend after fighting a long battle with cancer, about a 2-year battle with cancer. She was such an amazing health freedom advocate, stood next to Dr. James Neuenschwander, who we know is new, and he has been working with CHD science for several years now, has published several papers with us. But Trish, an amazing advocate. She's trained as a nurse, and she worked side by side with New in his practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She had volunteered for Millions Against Mandates, also Michigan for Vaccine Choice. And the picture that is shown in the article is me back in, I think 2021, where we were standing in front of the steps of the Michigan State Capitol for a rally. And during COVID, she was there, but she's always had a smile on her face, always so encouraging. It's such a loss to our community.
It is. It's a tragic loss. And how's Dr. New doing?
He's holding up. I can't even imagine. They have been fighting this battle together, and they've looked for different types of treatments overseas, other places in the United States where they've had to travel. And so, I think that probably he's very, very tired. He did appear on the Up Close event on Tuesday. At least at this point, we're pre-recording this. He's scheduled to appear, and I talked to him beforehand. He's like, "Yeah, let's move on. Let's just soldier on." I mean, and it's such a testament to what Trish would want. I mean, it was always about the kids. It was always about saving babies. It was always about preventing vaccine injury and preventing harm, as well as remediating, cleaning up the mess, and her functional role in the MAPS organization, where Dr. Neuenschwander is the president of the MAPS organization, was always first and foremost for them.
So Dr. New, many of you will remember Dr. New also for being on the bus when he came out and spoke out, and he was in Vax 2 as well, working with the science team. But always behind every man like Dr. New is a fantastic woman like Trish, and they don't often get the recognition that they deserve, fighting in the background. But it's a huge, sad loss. Is there anything we can do collectively?
At this point, I think just praying for the family, the extended family. Trish leaves behind, of course, her husband and children and grandchildren in the Ann Arbor, Michigan area. I think they live a little bit further from Ann Arbor. He always talked about the lake that he lived on. And so, I think that he's able to go home to the lake in the evenings. But just prayers for the family, support for also the MAPS organization that carries forward. Really, it's I think it's a medical academy of practitioners for children with special needs. And so it's such an amazing organization. They have a conference every year, twice a year, and they have so many different practitioners that are looking at healing, and I think that's so important. Being able to identify the problems, identify the issues is great, but there are a lot of individuals that are quote unquote the collateral damage in the war against infectious disease. I have my own son Stephen. You have Billy. You also you have Kent, and so the MAPS organization is absolutely amazing with the work that they do.
Yeah, well, this is tragic news, and we're so sorry for Dr. New and his family, and what a big loss for us all is losing Trish as well. So, Dr. Hooker, thank you for being on this morning, and we're now going to hand the show over to Dr. Meryl Nass.
Good morning, CHD. We are recording today on Monday, the 27th of July, for a show on July 30th. And I'm telling you that because global events may change. This show is all about many things that are happening in the world that we are going to try to tie together and explain to you in a way that none of the mass media are doing. It's a very active, dangerous time with a lot of things going on. Chris Martenson, my guest, has called it a polycrisis. I don't want to get people upset, but I want to give them tools so they can understand the world and prepare better. And we're always trying to do that. Now, Chris is a very interesting guy. He has a Ph.D. in toxicology from Duke, and he has a master's in business and administration. But he is expert in a number of areas. Investing, he has a website called peakfinancialinvesting.com. He has an important website that you should look at called peakprosperity.com. He also has a Substack, chrismartenson.substack.com. But Peak Prosperity is really the best place to go for a general idea of what Chris is interested in, what he knows, and what he can do. We're also going to be talking about an article by Richard Medhurst, who has a Substack, richardmedhurst.com. And we'll probably look at some of the graphs from his recent articles. They're not that recent, a couple of months old. And so Chris is really good at putting things together. And I want to list some of the things that everyone should be aware of and try to fit all of these pieces together, because that's what's really important in order to understand our world today, because we're getting a very skewed impression if we listen to media, basically media anywhere in the world. So let me just mention some of the things that we're going to talk about today in the next 45 minutes. We're going to talk about the war with Iran, the war between Ukraine and Russia, in which the U.S. is supplying weapons and targeting information and basically egging the Ukrainians on. The Houthi blockage of the Red Sea on top of the Iranian blockage and in part American blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to talk about the lack of sufficient munitions and anti-missile missiles, because the United States has used up a great deal, perhaps a third or more of its stores of missiles that can target drones and other missiles coming toward American assets. The lack of urea, ammonia, sulfur, and oil, whose prices have gone up very dramatically and will affect the food supply. I forgot to mention, by the way, Chris bought a farm. Chris lives on a farm, so he is also a farmer. We've had a lot of farm shows, and he'll talk to you about the meaning of these things in terms of growing food. Let's go back a bit. The Nord Stream bombings, 4 bombs on what turned out to be 3 pipelines, because whoever laid the bombs made a mistake and bombed one pipeline twice. Massive strikes on Russian oil refineries and other Russian oil and gas assets that you haven't been hearing about. the pirating, the seizure of tankers, particularly Russian tankers, in international waters, the takeover of Venezuela and its oil, the largest supply of oil in the world sits within Venezuela and its offshore waters, and the IMEC, this Middle East corridor that Trump is very interested in, that he wants to be managed by the Board of Peace, which he set up to be its director for life, and is selling memberships to the Board of Peace for $1 billion. It's a lot to think about, and I'm going to ask Chris to start explaining this to us, and then I will interrupt occasionally if I think he's saying something that needs to be further explained to the audience. So, you know me, if somebody is using what I consider jargon or language or concepts that are not familiar to the general audience, I will interrupt and try to get them explained. So Chris, are you good with just diving in?
Absolutely, Meryl. So good to see you again, and glad to be here with all of your assembled viewership. I will do my best to be jargon-free. It's something I try very hard to do as well because, we're all busy people and we all have things we need to do in life. And so I don't expect anybody besides goofballs like myself to really dive in and know the names of all the Saudi refineries and stuff like that. But that's the sort of the level of context I think we have to understand. And my background as a scientist, then as a businessman, that's what the Ph.D. and MBA got me started at. But for 25 years, all I've been doing is this, which is I analyze world events. I try and make sense of them and then present those back to people, hopefully in a way so that they can take action on it. Because I think information without action often is just anxiety producing. So let me cut to the chase. All this information has led me and my wife to live on a farm. We've got cows and chickens and all the necessary fruit trees and all this and that, and really ample water. And we did that because the way we saw the world going, we thought, probably be a good idea to maybe have some of our own food security in hand. So that's how we started all this. And now, after all the post-COVID and all the other revelations that have come forward, I now understand that my food system is actually sickening and poisonous. And so I'm actually glad to be in charge of creating a significant share of our own food. But I'll be honest, originally it was the stick. I was like, there could be food insecurity. So we better have a farm. And now it would be that plus the carrot in equal measure. And the carrot is, we get to eat actually non-poisonous food that we understand what's in it. And that's a huge blessing. So February 28th, the United States conducts in concert with Israel what they call the decapitation strike, right? They killed the equivalent of the Pope in Iran and a number of other people in the senior government. And we thought, that'll teach them. It was a Game of Thrones. There's this thing called the Red Wedding episode. And it was like that. We invited these people in, they're having negotiations, and then we kill them. And so leaving aside my editorial concerns about that as an actual negotiating strategy, what happened next really surprised us, the United States government a lot, which was that within 5 minutes of that happening, rather than being discombobulated and, ready to collapse, it turned out that the IRGC in Iran, that's their Revolutionary Guard Corps, were ready for this. They had plans. And so within 5 minutes, they were launching missiles, big, fat ballistic missiles and drones against our bases. And within the next 24 to 48 hours, I think the United States suffered the most catastrophic loss of military hardware and position and probably reputation since World War II. And it was nasty, Brutus, and short. I think by March 3rd, we should have said, ouch, that wasn't what we were thinking. Let's step back and reconsider. We didn't. We were very angry as a country, and so kept that all going. Coincidentally or not, on March 2nd is when Ukraine really started hitting hard Russia's refinery systems and also their oil depots and the whole complex of energy. They've since moved on to attacking the actual economic infrastructure of Russia, which includes things their equivalent of Amazon warehouses. We can get to that later. But the point is that for some reason, the United States decided it would be a really good idea to basically put at threat 25% of the world's oil flows, which is what comes out of the Strait of Hormuz prior to the war, and plus another 13% coming out of Russia. To say that risks an energy shock unlike anything in history is underselling it quite a bit. Prior gigantic energy shocks include 2022, when we thought in the aftermath of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, that, the United States Treasury was going to sanction Russian oil. There was a thought that could take 3 million barrels a day offline. So there was this big panic. Oil went from about 75 or 80 to 120, so it bounced there between 110, 120 for a few months. And then, it wasn't that bad, because guess what? Russia got around the sanctions and sold their oil at a discount to India. No big deal. So everything calmed down again. But this time, we lost a minimum of 12 million barrels a day right off the get-go. Well, 21 right off the top. But then there were some workarounds that happened because Saudi Arabia had a pipeline. There was another little pipeline here. There was some tank oil, literal trucks driven out of Iraq. So there were some leaks in that that could be workarounds. But you settle it all down, and the world was missing 12 million barrels of oil a day. And we have been ever since March 1st. And this is astonishing. You probably have to add another 1 to 2 million barrels a day on top of that because of the Russian stuff that's happened. So 12, 13, 14 million barrels a day. And what is it now? We're like 150 days into this thing. It's insane that we're missing this much oil and that there isn't absolute panic going on out there in the markets, but also in people's lives, because one does not just easily get rid of oil. It's not replaceable. We don't like say, oh, we'll use less oil, we'll have more solar panels. They're not swappable commodities in this story at all. And
You mean immediately? Immediately?
No,
Maybe in the long
forever
term.
ish. Like we're not close at this point in time to being able to run jumbo jets on electricity. We're not close to running giant container ships on electricity.
Right.
We're not close to running the U.S. military on electricity. We're just not close. So it functionally, it's forever, right? Maybe we could get there in a while, but and by the way,
our subs are, we have nuclear subs. Could we have nuclear container ships?
Oh, absolutely, and China's working on them, but it's going to take some time to get there. But yeah, absolutely, and I think that would be a good thing overall. But 70% of oil is used for transportation. The other 30% is used for asphalt, resins, oleos, paraffins, everything else, right? So we use it as well. It goes into plastics. It goes all sorts of directions. So just that part is fully non-substitutable currently from electricity. We don't have any reasonable ways to convert electrons into plastic. You can sort of do it at the on a lab at little micro scales, but I mean not at productive scale. So we're risking actually the very firmament of our industrial economy, which is energy, right? And so this is what I've been studying for 25 years. I have a book called The Crash Course on it. I have a video series called The Crash Course. And what that does is say, hey, we can't just look at the economy alone anymore. As economists will do, they'll say, oh, well, here's what we know about the economy, and here's how we get it going faster, and if we could just get interest rates a little up or down. But the overall goal of the economists always, Meryl, is how do we get this thing cooking along so that it's growing by some amount every year? That's what we want. We want 3% economic growth, 4%, 5% would be great, right? But we want economic growth year after year. The problem with that is that that's anything that's growing by some percent over time, like 3% a year, is growing exponentially. And anything that's growing exponentially has a limit to it, right? We can't grow our economy infinitely on a finite planet. And I think we were already starting to bump up against a few of the ridges in that story because, there just isn't quite as much copper as we thought compared to what we want to do to electrify everything. We have a little problem with lithium. Hang on, cobalt, manganese. We're running into all these sort of limits, not to say we're running out, but it's just, we just can't grow like we used to. So that's the economists, though. They don't think about that stuff. Resources are externalities. You just ignore them. If the price goes high enough, more show up magically always, and that's just how the world works. But let's just look back historically kind of a bit. This thing we call the Industrial Revolution began about 1840. It's a couple hundred years old. So it's just like, it's a very, very recent thing. And it's already consumed more than half of all different kinds of resources out there. And could just start listing them all off. But to get any of those resources, it starts with oil. Oil is the thing. Right now, we use oil, turn it into diesel. Diesel goes into these big giant mining machines. They go into the earth and they get out copper ore or cobalt or whatever we're doing. And that's how we get it out, refine it, manufacture it, ship it, move it, all that. And so what I do is I put on what are called my energy goggles when I go out. I don't see a traffic jam. I see just oil in the manufacture of the cars and then the moving of the cars, mostly oil. Even if it's an electric car, a lot of oil embedded in the manufacture of that particular thing. So oil, and then you just look up in the sky and there's all these jets going everywhere. And that's, again, currently, that's oil. And so when I look at that, I understand that energy is really, really important to our economy. It's not sort of important, it's the master resource. If you don't have energy, none of the rest, can't have any of the rest. So, okay, so somehow we just took 25% of the world's oil offline. We, the United States, along with Israel, probably with NATO too. So kind of the West, I'll say at this point in time, has just put a giant spanner in the entire economic machinery, right? And then the second thing to know about this is that, economics has a lot of kind of, I'll call them fuzzy charts that you have to squint at things, sort of see the correlations. They're not really that tight. But you want to know what's really tight is if you took a chart and you just showed how much oil a country is consuming on one axis and then the size of its GDP along another axis, you get a straight line. Very little variation around that. Very little. And it says something that's pretty obvious when you look at it my way, which is that, if a country has more economic activity happening, well, they have more things moving around, right? They got more jets, more cars, more trucks, more ships, more. So those are larger economies, and so they're consuming more energy. And so it's a very, very tight relationship. There's no country in the world that's figured out how to burn a lot of energy and be poor, or burn very little energy and be rich. There's nobody's solved those equations, straight line. So if we say, if we took 25% of the world's energy offline, for a year, what would happen? Well, first we'd eat through every existing surface store we could. We have some tanks, we have salt caverns, there's stuff hanging out in ships. We would burn through as much of that as we could until it got really kind of dicey. And then we would have to start pruning back limbs off of our economic bush. How far back do we have to prune? Well, the answer is the last time the world was burning 25% less oil was 2011. And back then, the world economy was 36% smaller than it is today. And so I could just tell you with reasonable accuracy, could be wrong either direction a little bit, but not much, that if we suddenly said, hey, we're going to have to do without 25% of world's oil, we're going to have an economy that's at least 1/3 smaller than it currently is. And by the way, that would put the Great Depression to shame. And
let me interrupt.
Then, yeah,
so
please.
In the Great Depression, the economy was reduced by 20%. Next
25%, depending on which country you're in. Yeah.
I think the U.S., I've read 20%. But also, what happened in the beginning of COVID when most planes stopped flying, people stopped going to work, et cetera? How much did our economy go down then?
It didn't go down all that much because we basically paid for it. People got stimulus checks. So consumption was still up. And individual humans stopped going around. But remember, there were essential workers. If you're an Amazon delivery driver,
right,
you're essential. Right? If you're a DoorDash driver, you're essential. So we still had lots and lots of things going hither and yon. But it was still a gigantic hiccup in the flow of oil. And quite a lot of demand for oil suddenly got crushed. And we had a very weird, rare thing during COVID where the paper price of oil went to minus $40 a barrel for one famous day because there was nowhere to put it, right? Because we just turned off so much demand all at once. But we did that basically on our terms. Like we humans said, we're gonna pull demand back. If you yank oil off the other end because it's just missing, now you have to deal with that shock, which is entirely different. It's actually missing energy. It's not there even if you wanted it to be. So that kind of makes it substantially different. And by the way, there are a bunch of countries in the world that didn't quite go along with the entire lockdown thing, but the whole West did for sure. Yep. Yeah.
So how much less oil did we use during the lockdown in the U.S.?
I'd have to look that up. It was a pretty significant dump in there. I think it probably went down in our country, based on the chart I have in my head, 5 to 6 million barrels per day. But just for a very brief window, it's like a month where it dipped down there, and then we came back with all the essential stuff and mostly got back on board.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, quite significant. You're talking about less energy and a reduction in our economic activity, worse than the Great Depression.
That's what's possibly on the books here. And what's different this time too, and this gets a little economically wonky, but I'm sure your viewers have heard a lot of this. We have a lot more debt now than we did back then. A lot more at the federal level, but I mean saturated
And
all
personal.
across. Personal debt too, right? And corporate debt. We just went on a big binge here lately
Yes.
to put in AI data centers. I mean, massive borrowings have happened there. So debt is this funny thing. So when we say that, quick definition, if I have currency, if I have a $100 bill or I've got zeros and ones on my hard disk in my checking account, I mean, this is immediately spendable money. And so I can use that money to get involved with the economy right now. I can either save it, but I could also spend it right away. So my currency is actually a claim on current goods and services, as they say economically, but that's current real stuff. Like my currency buys real stuff. Debt, however, is a claim on my future wealth. So if I have a mortgage for 30 years, for the next 360 months, somebody has a claim on my future money, right? So when we look at it that way, with the amount of debt we have right now, it is claiming a huge proportion of our future economy. And if that future economy is not bigger, but instead smaller, this is a gigantic catastrophe. That's when you get to the Great Depression. That's when you get to what they call a deflationary credit destruction cycle, where because I can't pay my debts off, you can't pay your debts off, and the next person can't pay theirs, and all the money just sort of like freezes. That's why the Federal Reserve is going to be there ready, I'm sure, with a federal currency, some kind of a currency unit, some digital thingy, just to make sure that they can just keep everything moving. Because the one thing our financialized economy can't stand is stasis, and let alone freezing up. If it freezes up, like the whole thing just shatters. It's pretty bad. That's what we were facing in the great financial crisis in 08, 09, into early part of 2010, which is that Lehman went down, and because Lehman went down, nobody knew where the risk was, and so no banks would deal with each other, and so everything froze, and it really scared them a lot, them being the government and financial types, because that almost destroyed our financial system. It really did. So we have this financial system. Think of it as a shark. It's got to keep swimming. If it's swimming, it's alive. But if it ever stops swimming, it gets in huge trouble. So to risk that, because we want to make, I don't even know what our point is in Iran. I honestly have no idea what the point is, unless the point is to keep the strait closed, because then we're doing great. And I understand that is happening flawlessly. But
Right.
I do not understand why we're risking literally what looks like catastrophe.
In order to fight Iran.
That's the story. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, so we've got the Iran war. We are helping Ukraine bomb all these Russian oil and gas sites. And it started out where the Iranians, I guess, were mainly bombing storage facilities, but now they're into bombing refineries, which are going to take much longer to get back online. And the same with the Russians. So we're going after their refineries and crippling their production of oil and gas products for many months.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, American companies like Chevron are attempting to make deals to develop pipelines, new pipelines, and new sources of gas, such as the Levantine Basin off of Israel, Gaza. This is a gas basin that the Gazans wanted to develop and earn some money from for Gaza. But Israel has never allowed that, and now there are deals in the works for Chevron and I think others to develop that site. It may extend into Lebanon and Syria offshore water, under the offshore waters of Syria and Lebanon. And maybe that is why Israel and the US have been involved with changing the government in Syria and, of course, making sure there is a government in Lebanon that is basically pro-Israel, that will do whatever Israel wants. And then again, we took over Venezuela basically by kidnapping their head of state, which is not really legal, and they hadn't done anything to us. And the claim that we were doing it because of drug interdiction was baloney.
Mm.
So we got control of all of that very heavy oil, and we stopped the oil, or any oil from going to Cuba from Russia, from Venezuela, from wherever, turned the lights out in Cuba, which is something we've been trying to take over for 60 years. And there's another place. Oh yeah, Greenland. We want the resources of Greenland, and we want the ability to use Greenland as a site to potentially interdict Russian ships and oil tankers and such. So what you've just heard from Chris is that what the U.S. has done in these various places, but particularly Iran, has led to predictably much less oil availability at the moment, but going into the future, even if this war ends tomorrow, much less availability of oil and gas and energy for quite a while. I mean, we're talking probably minimum of a year. I think it was Qatar said it would take 4 or 5 years for them, and this was months ago, for them to get some of their facilities back online. Why might the U.S. be doing this when there isn't any clear strategic advantage? We haven't been able to get rid of the Iranians as a potential threat to Israel. They weren't really ever a threat to us. And we haven't been able to knock out their missiles, their command and control. They had everything decentralized. They were ready for us. They'd been expecting, the U.S. and Israel have bombed them in the past, so they knew what might happen. And as you said, they were ready for it. So given all that, what the heck is the U.S. trying to accomplish in Iran?
Well, I'm going to add one other big thing to this story, and maybe it starts to get a little clearer, which is we didn't just knock out oil and gas. We knocked out everything else that comes from that region. And so oil and gas, you can take them out raw and ship them raw if you want. But it's much better if you put them through what are called petrochemical facilities, and you turn them into lots of different things, right? And so the world is missing a huge proportion of those petrochemical outputs. These are raw feedstocks that go into the base of the industrial machinery, right, and get turned into too many products to discuss. But as well, they get turned into things like fertilizer. And so what we also did is we actually took out a significant chunk of the globe's fertilizer supply, both urea, which is a nitrogenous-based fertilizer made out of natural gas. Qatar makes a big chunk of that. Excuse me, and then also the sulfur, which is a byproduct of taking what's called sour oil. It's high sulfur oil, 3, sometimes close to 4% by weight sulfur. And that gets stripped out during refining because we don't like to burn that in our diesel engines. But then you have this big pile of this yellow stuff left over. It's not yellow stuff that's left over. That's turned into sulfuric acid principally. It's used in mining, but it's used big time. About half to 2/3 of sulfuric acid actually gets turned into, is used to liberate phosphate from rocks so we can get these phosphate fertilizers. And so we're missing just enormous chunks of the fertilizer bands as well right now. And so this year is going to be an energy crisis. We'll see what kind of economic crisis that turns into. But if this keeps going, Meryl, we're going to also have a fertilizer crisis, which is a food crisis, which is a famine crisis, which, seems to be getting not enough attention at this point in time compared to the possible impact of this. And this is going to hit the world disequally. Honestly, who got most of their oil and natural gas out of that whole region that's been attacked right now? It's typically the East, right? So this is China, it's Japan too, but it's, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. All these countries are actually most directly influenced by this and potentially damaged by this action. So it's not unthinkable. As my friend Michael Jan says, wars do two things, right? They grow, and then they grow out of control. And I have that sense we're almost at that out of control stage, because this weekend, they're like, we might get back to talks with Iran, but then the Houthis were busy getting involved. And as well, Saudi Arabia claimed that they were attacked with drones on their Al Abqaiq refinery, which, by the way, it's not just a refinery. This is This refinery provides 7% of the world's total petrochemical output. It's a big, sprawling place. I'm not saying it was destroyed, but certainly it received some damage because Saudi Arabia said that there were these Iranian-linked Shia groups up there in Iraq. And so now you're starting to get this sense that maybe other players are starting to get on board. And Ukraine, accidentally or not, struck an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea, and Iran said, "Oh, we're going to have to respond to that." That's the growing out of control stage. You start to see other players get involved, and we're no longer controlling the narrative anymore, if we ever were. So whatever the United States thought it was going to achieve, what's at risk now is just a wider conflagration where nobody will even really know what's happening. But when the dust settles, we're going to see damaged economies, damaged refinery complexes. Oil infrastructure is pretty fragile stuff. We're going to see just things that could take years to undo. And unfortunately, we don't have that much time before the world's financial markets start to shudder around all of this. And this is all hoping beyond hope that somehow this doesn't trigger some sort of direct confrontation with China, kinetic confrontation, because if that happens, my prediction is we've already lost that war due to the fact that China outmanufactures us by some huge factor. I don't even know how big, 10, 100 to 1. It's some huge number. They put out a video a couple months ago where they're like, "Hey guys, just want you to know we're making these supersonic cruise missiles here in this factory, and this one factory can turn out 1,000 a month." Right? We can't even do that. We can't even do that in a year across the whole country. So, yeah, it looked pretty impressive.
And yeah, we've choked off China's oil supply, but at the same time, we've sold China oil, which is difficult to understand, from our strategic petroleum supply. I agree with you. I think food will become much more expensive in the U.S. We've already degraded, even before this year, our ability to produce food here. So we're not only are we producing very poor quality food with lots of toxic materials in it, but we're also producing less of it, many less cows. As you may remember, we're down to the 1951 number of cows raised in the United States. We have just lifted the ban on importing cows from Mexico, which was imposed a year ago because of the screwworm. So now we're going to, despite the fact that screwworms are still active, and screwworms have affected animals in the southern U.S., in Texas particular, and I think New Mexico already, we are going to let in cows from Mexico because we don't have enough beef. And the U.S. imported in the last year we know about, which I think was 24, imported $50 billion worth of food more than we exported. A lot of money per person. So we used to be, a breadbasket. We are no longer a breadbasket for the world. And fewer acres are being farmed in the United States. Farmers are going bankrupt. I've talked a lot about that on this program in the past. There are many different reasons, primarily bad regulatory decisions of the federal government that have led farming to be uneconomic. So farmers have not, the median farmer in the U.S. has not been able to make money any of the last 5 years by farming. So
that's by design, by the way.
And yes, absolutely. I believe it's to get the farmers off the land, have the land sold to big industrial farming farms and farming industries. Farming industries are making a lot of money. So the profit margins for many industries, including the meatpacking industry, are huge. But the farmers aren't getting any of it. We'll see prices rise in the U.S. Hopefully, we'll try to grow more food, and maybe more farmers will try to grow it without fertilizers and pesticides because they're becoming so expensive that they can't afford them. They'll just lose money. They're losing money right now on every acre of corn. Quite a lot of money, over $100 an acre.
Can I talk about that really quick? Because there's something here that's really germane to this whole thing. So the price of corn, you would think, like, if you're a corn producer, you're a farmer, and I make cornflakes, I'm a consumer, right? We would strike a deal, and that's how the market would be set. That's used to be how it was set. But starting about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, futures trading, as it's called, became really dominant in this whole thing. And so what futures trading is that I could buy a bushel of corn right now on a futures market. I'm never going to take delivery of it, but I'm going to buy it or sell it. I could sell a bushel of corn. I don't even have one, but I'm trading in the futures for them. So it's the equivalent of doing that. And so what we find, Meryl, is that if the producer and the consumer is the signal, right, because that's what we really care about, are these two match, supply and demand? That's what a market should be. There's these speculators on top who are trading in that same commodity, who end up setting the price for these things, even though they have no interest in producing it or consuming it, but they're playing with the price of it, right? And that signal, if that's a unit of 1, the noise is now units of 40 or 50, depending on which market, sometimes higher. For oil, it's 50.
Wow.
And so what's the effect of that? Surprise! If you're a farmer today, you're getting the exact same nominal price for a bushel of corn that you got in 2008, because the futures market says that's what it's worth. 2008, can you think, has the farmer's input cost gone up potentially since 2008 for anything? Seed, fertilizer, even property taxes, everything, right? So it'd be as stupid as if I said, oh, I'm going to open up a futures market for Ford F-150 trucks, and Ford is just going to have to take whatever price for their trucks the futures market decides they ought to get for their trucks. And next thing you know, we decide as a future speculators that Ford F-150s should cost $38,000. You know what they cost in 2008? Ford would go out of business in a skinny minute. And so how and why as a nation, why the CFTC allows this, why they don't regulate this, why nobody in Congress has any interest in this is because we have a captured system. And that captured system wants to make sure that all the profits go to this corporate layer, you know? And Simon Dixon really explained it. He snapped into focus for me. He's like, look, in China, the political power is at the top of the apex, and the corporations are subservient to that. We're inverted. We have a corporate power interest that obviously has the power. Congress and Senate, they sound like powerful people, but they're really order takers in this story. And so it's really the corporate powers. Now, the corporate powers like it that farmers' noses are just barely above water, and they're just, one sniffle away from drowning. They like it that way because then all the profits flow to the top. And that's the system we have. And so these futures markets are just a fancy pants way of making it look like we've got capitalism markets, but we don't. We have a captured system which is designed predatorily to make sure that the actual producers, those people with dirt under the fingernails principally, they take the real risks, they work real hard, they wake up in the morning, that those are the people who work the hardest and receive the least. And I don't know why we ever decided that's the system we want, but it's the system we have.
Right. Very good. So all these things together going to lead to higher prices. Probably we will be able to travel much less. There'll be fewer flights. People won't afford them. There won't be enough jet fuel. So why is the Trump administration taking us here? What's in it for them?
Well, I'm not sure if it's the Trump administration because I believe we have a permanent class, a permanent deep state that's running, right? And so it's kind of like, why was there no daylight between Trump, then Biden, then Trump around like the mRNA shots, for instance? Just like it's the same policy. Everybody should get these things, right? It doesn't matter who's in power at any point in time from a presidential standpoint. So what do they want out of this? Well, look, the data is pretty clear on this. We're watching thousands of data centers go in. They clearly want a lot of data centers. We're going to get data centers good and hard. And so it's very clear that they're setting us up for an extension of what happened under COVID. What happened under COVID? They trampled every possible right. Legality didn't matter. Remember the CDC was telling landlords what they could and couldn't do? What? The CDC? Housing policy? It's crazy, right? But they did some important things under COVID, right? So Fourth Amendment rights, right out the window. You don't have any of those, right? First Amendment rights, out the window. You don't have any of those either, right? And so on. And so we're just watching. That was, I think, a big training exercise for how do you put people in lockdowns. And they really want these lockdowns. So wouldn't you know it, there are groups out there very excitedly talking about how now, well, if this energy crisis really comes true, we can now put people into these climate lockdowns because luckily we already have the plans in place, but it's an energy emergency, same plans, So we'll
Yes.
just put people in those situations, right? 15-minute cities, designated times that you can and can't travel, how far you can go, maybe universal basic income for people who lose their jobs as a function of this. But that's been clearly on somebody's menu for a long time. Is that the only script that's running? I have no clue. Probably not. But I know it is a script that's running. And so, yes, we are sailing right now into an energy emergency with somebody very active is like suppressing the price of oil right now on a daily basis in the futures market. I have my ideas about who it is, but that it's happening, no question. I watch it all the time, right? Just these mass smashes that happen. Because the price has been held too low, demand has been held too high. The most recent data we have for the United States is that overall oil consumption this year compared to last year, it's up 2.9%. Not down, it's up. Why? Well, because the price is not constructive, if you will, or destructive to demand. So we have too much demand. Well, what happens when your demand is too high for supplies? Your inventories go down. Are we seeing that? Oh, yeah. Our inventories are just cratering right now, not just for oil and the SPR and commercial inventories, but for above ground refined finished product like diesel, kerosene, which is jet fuel, gasoline. All of those are just going down. So why would you hold the price down knowing that you have demand set too high and you're watching your supplies just crater? Where does that go? Well, if you do that long enough, Meryl, you just run out. You hit what's called tank bottoms. You just there's no more diesel. Oh no, it's a crisis. We're gonna have to manage this. And fortunately, we've got this God in a box over here. This AI is going to help us manage how we apportion who gets the diesel and who doesn't, right? Basically, your essential and non-essential uses, right? Sort of get carved out and divvied up. I think that's where we're going with this. If anything, all I can imagine is there's this crisis, and I'm not even sure it's the Trump administration, but it's happening on their watch, so they'll get credit or the opposite of credit for this, right? But there's been this big push to create these crises that allow the next sort of layer of this architecture of control to be just sort of put on people, and not even put on people. You make the crisis big enough, most people who have no context will actually be clamoring for it and saying, please help make this crisis go away. Oh, okay.
Save us.
Since you asked so nicely,
Right. And since people don't understand it, they don't know what's going on. They just need help, right? Because nobody's really putting the pieces together for them. What about this crisis leading to electronic money, an electronic money system, programmable money?
So this is the thing that I really cut my teeth on early on, and I was triggered off on this big quest by the book by G. Edward Griffin, A Creature from Jekyll Island, right? And it explains how money is made. It's not hard. I couldn't believe that I didn't know how money was made in our system of banking, right? Because it's really not hard. You can teach it to a fifth grade class without much difficulty, and I have. But I got my MBA, nice school. They taught me how to compete for the money in the arena, but they never showed me how the arena was made. So you find out, simplifying, that all money is loaned into existence, that banks just make money out of thin air. It's a good system as long as, Meryl, you don't have any constraints on the outside, as long as that system can continue like that shark I mentioned, as long as it can continue to grow, it's happy as a clam, right? But here's a feature of it. We need to have more debt coming into the system year after year after year. And the problem with that is that more debt means more claims on the future. Can the future be bigger than the present economically? No, it runs out of room sooner or later. Well, that's the territory we're in right now. So just from a math perspective, we're getting very close to the end of the runway for this particular story, which is the US dollar, which is fiat debt-based money. I call it faith-based money. But what do you do if you don't have that? You better have a second system in place. And I know, I guarantee you they're thinking about it because I can think about it. And a lot of people in my space, we think about it. We're like, geez, when this math problem bursts, what do? You have to hit a reset button of some kind. You either eliminate all the outstanding debt, sort of start over, clean sweep. People say, why do we do that? It's just a jubilee. It's in the ancient, biblical text. What would be wrong with that?
The Romans did it.
Yeah. But they knew they were going to do that. And so it was 7 periods of 7. So at the 49th year, the reset button would get hit. You know what happened in the last 7 years as you're approaching that? People stopped making loans and they started dialing it all back anyway because they knew the reset was coming. To just hit the reset now at max ascendant debt, it would be a complete wipeout. Every pension, right? Every savings that exists at scale, sovereign wealth funds, basically everything sort of gets wrecked all at once. And I don't think we're quite down for that at this point. So what do you do? I think they can do this by giving us a digital currency that will be sort of like hot swapping, from a defective, failing currency to a new shiny one. I think that's the plan. I liken it, though, to trying to replace both wings on an airplane mid-flight. It's going to be very difficult to do because it's not just this thing called a dollar. Whether you put it, it's literally, for the most part, what we call a dollar is completely abstract, right? Some people never handle physical cash at all anymore. It's completely abstract. Well, I go to work and then digits show up, and I know they're here because they show up on my phone app showing my bank account, and then I Venmo them to somebody else. It's purely abstract, right? So who cares if you replace one abstract system with a second one if they're both equally sort of ungrounded from reality? And the second problem is that every single contract that's ever been written out there, every single agreement that's been written, whether it's for a house that's about to be built or for a long-term distribution and acquisition plan or something, they're all written in dollars. So every single contract would have to be renegotiated around this new thing, which we're going to call stable coins or something, when nobody knows what they are, what they really mean, or how they're going to be managed yet, or how much they can trust them. And that's the key element of any money system, is it has to have trust at the very bottom of it. And I would dare say that I think trust in the U.S. government is plumbing all-time lows in my lifetime at this moment.
So people like the Secretary of Commerce are trying to, again, create value out of thin air. So they're talking about what the value is of all the property that the federal government owns. That if if it could be sold. And so that property is buildings, but primarily it's land. And out west, in the east, I had no idea that the government owns like half the land out in the west and has been allowing ranchers and others to basically rent it for generations. But suddenly that can stop. And when it stops, people are very angry because they thought they had a deal that was going on. They've improved the land, they've built structures on it, and now the government says, "Oh no, it's ours. Actually, go away." So if all that land were financialized, if it was converted into some theoretical value, then we're looking at quite a lot of money, and I think that is the going to be the proposed underpinning of a new currency. They're going to say, well, we got all this stuff, so you can trust us because we've got, many millions of acres of land, and we've got all these buildings, and we've got all this gold in Fort Knox, and blah, blah, blah. And therefore, we need to zero things out, but we're not going to zero out the contracts. We're going to keep the dollar. We're just going to make it a stable coin pegged to a dollar or a CBDC or some other kind of electronic form of money, or cryptocurrency. And we want everybody to go along with it because it will be much better. Like you said, it'll be shiny and new, and we promise it's going to be better than the old stuff. And we're not going to tell you that you're going to lose all privacy, that you won't be able to, you won't be able to give tips, that your money will be automatically taxed. We're never going to tell you that we can just take money out. And maybe the federal government isn't going to be the only one that just takes money out and decides everybody gets taxed 10% this year. But maybe the UN can tax you also. Maybe your town can tax you also. You lose control of your money when it is in this electronic form. So I think, that is one. If the government or the people in control, whoever they may be, MI6, CIA, deep state, whatever you want to call them, we don't know exactly who they are. Certainly bankers, Catherine Austin Fitts puts bankers at the top of that heap. If they can either create or at least benefit from a very chaotic system in which people are being squeezed enough that they're willing to go along with a new form of currency, that would be a very good thing for bankers and for governments. And for anyone else who thinks they're going to be at the control end of it. I think I mean, Trump has bragged about once he took over Venezuela, the U.S. controlling something like 62% of the world's oil. And so
Oil
I think
reserves.
thank you, oil reserves. So I think that is another piece of it is trying to grab up these chess pieces, which again can be used as collateral for some new currency or some new system. I think you're right that what the Democrats and the Republicans have done along many of these lines is basically following the exact same playbook. I mean, it was Biden under whom, and the United States had to have been responsible for the bombing of the Nord Stream pipelines, which was, and the Germans went along with it. You know, the EU went along with it, and yet it was supplying a massive amount of energy to Germany and to some, and less so to other countries.
This is a really momentous period of time. So if we really dial it back, go back really far, it used to be that almost everybody was a slave of some sort, right? And that includes like feudal Europe, right? You're either a serf or part of the nobility, right? But you didn't really have any control over your life. You didn't own anything. You just worked away. It's basically like slavery, right? And so that was then. And then this thing called the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine comes along and like, oh, we don't really need human muscle anymore. And that's right at the same time that we came up with this whole idea of this current system of banking, right, which is fractional reserve banking. You know, very, very fun time, which was great because then you could actually enslave almost everybody. The way I look at it, this might be a big jump for some people listening, but if you think about it, what's the definition of slavery? It's you no longer have control over your own life and what you physically have to do because somebody told you so. Well, if you take out a mortgage and got a boat with a mortgage, you know, a loan on it, a car with a loan on it, and like you're in debt, you got credit cards. What's the functional difference, right? There's no difference except you're your own slave master, right? You're like, oh, I got to get out of bed because I wouldn't want to default on my credit card, lose the house, you know, have my kids not be able to go to college, whatever the story is. So it turned out fiat money was this awesome system of control. And by the way, for those who control it, like if you're at the central bank level, they just make it out of thin air and they give as much of it as they want to their friends and family. Like they literally do this. This happened in the Great Financial Crisis, right? Individual Americans by the millions lost their homes, right? But oops, Goldman Sachs, AIG, JP Morgan all got these fat, tasty 100 cents on the dollar bailouts, you know, so they didn't have to, you know, feel any pain, take any losses in that story. And so it's been this way forever and ever, right? G. Edward Griffin's book, again, Creature from Jekyll Island, explains this kind of like this weird system where it's capitalism for the poor, but socialism for the rich, right? You know, privatize the profits, but socialize the losses, right? And so that's the system we've had for a long time. Now we have this funny thing called AI coming along. And this is kind of a brain bender because when you look at it, we've already eliminated the need for human muscle labor to be an important part of any equation, right? For the most part, mostly eliminated. And animal muscles labor. Don't need that. Got machines. But now we have a machine that can actually replace human cognition. So, oops, that's kind of a big chunk of the remaining jobs that humans can do. So now what do you do? You know, and if you're the they in this story, I don't think they hate us, Meryl. I think it's worse than that. I think they're indifferent, completely indifferent, you know, to how things turn out for the little people. Okay, so this is going to be a huge shift. They're looking at this like, look, this AI thing's coming along. It's astonishing. It's going to sort of take care of everything, you know. And you have your tech bros and Elon saying, oh, it's going to be amazing. You know, anything you want, you know, we'll all live like kings because these robots will just clean our houses and make everything for us. Whether we get there or not, it's irrelevant. They are starting to think that we don't need all these people around. Like we just don't need them all. Like what are we even going to do with all these people? It's a fair question, even from my standpoint. It was like, what does somebody do? What do I tell my kids? Like if it turns out we don't need people to perform work anymore, what are we doing, right? Like, how do we, what's life about? Like, because we usually organize our lives around our activities, and a job turns out to be a big part of that. And at any rate, huge change is coming, but now they have this crazy thing where I think they've moved one step closer to the source of the Nile, where if before they had to control you with a whip, and then you kind of had to control, you were your own slave master with the money. Now they've gone even further, and they control how people think. It's big body of study. They call it fifth-gen warfare. You could call it propaganda, psyops, really effective marketing. You could hang a bunch of ornaments on this tree, but I think they've proven, and this was experimented in during COVID big time, is how do they control how people think? You want to know where it just landed on me like a ton of bricks, because I'm watching this and I was working with all these doctors at the time, still do, and hearing their stories of just being excommunicated because they dared to prescribe ivermectin or something like that. And at the same time, the doctors they were working with formerly are putting people on ventilators and remdesivir and killing up to 85% of the people who, like, unluckily came into that ICU. And they never quite could they couldn't get their brains were broken. Like, I talked to doctors who literally still believe to this day the COVID shots are good. And then if somebody gets sick, you put them on these death routines. And I'm like, how do you break somebody's brain like that? How do you, all the training, the logic, the deduction, the observational skills that get honed to be a doctor suddenly all got broken all at once. And I was like, pretty powerful. So I started to feel pretty bad about some doctors. And then I watched these lefties, Evie and I, my wife, we would go to these rallies, the No Kings rallies, the Elon's and Nazi rallies, because I just had to feel this up close and personal. And I saw all these people, and they were very, very emotionally attached to their messaging, and they had no context for it whatsoever. I had this woman yelling at me, Elon's going to take away the right of women to vote. I'm like, huh? He's not even a lawmaker, but how? And there was no there, right? No there, but
Right.
very. And I was like, oh, so I started to develop judgments about lefties. And then I watched the whole same thing happen to the right. I was like, what? We're all about warfare now? And I was watching these things, and in many cases, Meryl, what we're seeing is we saw people's belief systems get completely changed. And this is normally, belief systems can change, that's fine, but normally it comes with a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? Before you make the swap. So I live in Western Massachusetts, also called the Happy Valley. A lot of ex-hippies here. I know a lot of people, the entire time our kids were being homeschooled, they were anti-vaxxers, 100%. No way. Au naturel. All of a sudden they were saying, your kids can't play with ours if they don't get COVID vaxxed, without any struggle session. It's just like they had this new belief system. Like, how does that happen? Now, that's the power I'm talking about here. I think somehow we're up against a new system that is taken in neurolinguistics, biological, evolutionary biology, like all these disparate fields, plus instant real-time feedback from silicon fast, systems that are just trying things out. And I think they've really figured out how to control how big swaths of people think. And I can't think of anything more powerful than that. That's
Yes.
That's the new frontier, I think, in this story. And the only thing I can tell people, like, how do you get away from that? I kid you not, you gotta put the phone down. And because it's not like they're doing this to everybody, they're doing it to you personally and me personally. Like my little scrolly doom scroll on X is it's really tailored to make me, I don't know what, get outraged, be distracted, take me, it's designed for me to make me veer off in a certain direction. And I'm aware of that now.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful point, because we're going to need to end now. But I think we are dealing with very sophisticated, algorithmic, and you're right, absolutely different things targeted to individual people. They know now what everyone's interested in. They know every click you make. They know how long your eyes spend on each item that you look at. And we are basically being brainwashed through our screens and perhaps through our televisions, probably definitely through our televisions, although that is not going to be individualized. And these are things we're going to have to learn how to fight. We don't know how to do that yet, but we need to be thinking about it very seriously. And learn to be very circumspect about what you see. At the same time, I mean, you have to judge people. You have to judge Chris and judge me. Are we telling you this so that we can benefit? Or are we telling you this so that you can benefit? You have to be able to figure that out and ask that question of everybody you're listening to. When I read the New York Times, and I often will put headlines up on my Substack and explain it to people. Doesn't mean I believe the New York Times. I know every word in the New York Times is designed to make people feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. At the same time, occasionally they tell the truth, and it's interesting to read it as long as you know what's behind it. If you start believing it, luckily most of my friends have finally figured out that you don't believe the New York Times. It is a total propaganda rag. Anyway, look, this has been fabulous, Chris. I really thank you for making a lot of sense of what we're dealing with, telling us straight what we are likely to face, and helping people to make the choices they will need to make. Don't miss Chris at Peak Prosperity, at his Peak Financial Investing, and his Substack. He does lots of interviews. So sign up for at least one of his venues and pay more attention. And I thank you, Chris, and I thank the audience very much for listening.
Thank you, Meryl.
That one was taken on her first birthday, so that was 4 days before she passed away.
You don't have any other children.
I don't.
You had Sarah.
Mm-hmm. When I was pregnant with Sarah, I had never given vaccines a second thought. It wasn't really on my radar. I didn't even think that anything could go wrong due to vaccination.
And how was she when she was born?
She was amazing. She was 9 pounds 4 ounces. She was perfectly healthy. She was really beautiful, and it was a pretty straightforward labor and delivery for sure. I didn't have any real complications. She was a really great baby, really happy. She didn't cry very much. She developed normally. She was walking by the time she was 11 months. She said her first word, which was apple, probably a month before that.
Okay, so you went in for her year vaccines.
Yeah, her year wellness check.
So then what did the doctor go ahead and give her?
She had MMR, Hep A. She got Varivax, which was the chickenpox vaccine, and she also got Prevnar, which was the pneumonia vaccine. So measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, Hep A, and Prevnar. So 6, and pneumonia. So 6 different diseases she was being vaccinated against. She was kind of more tired than usual because she had been sick, and we put her down for kind of a late nap because she was feeling pretty sleepy about 5 o'clock p.m. She started fussing in her crib around 7 p.m. and my husband went into her nursery and rocked her and put her back down. He always kind of handled the nighttime stuff, and he went back into her nursery 2 hours later at 9 p.m. and she wasn't breathing. So he ran out of her nursery and screamed that Sarah wasn't breathing. I immediately got on the phone with 911. But I just knew she was gone when I looked at her. Her little foot had turned blue. The paramedics came and they were unable to revive her, and she was pronounced dead at our house. She didn't really seem like anything was really wrong. We put her down for a nap, not even thinking that we should really keep an extra close eye on her or anything like that. It was just very quick. Her ashes are actually inside this bear. This bear goes with us everywhere we go. I thought it was important that she be here today as well. The second my husband said that Sarah wasn't breathing, I knew it was the vaccines. My daughter was a healthy 1-year-old. Why would she have just died all of a sudden? It made no sense to me. It had to be the vaccines. Ours was kind of a landmark case because we received the highest settlement that had ever been awarded in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program for an infant death case.
So do they actually admit that your baby was killed by the vaccines?
They don't.
Well, why are they giving you money?
That's a good question. So you can even look up my case online. You can look up Riddle, which is my maiden name, RIDL, versus the Health and Human Services. You'll see the government stance that they do not believe that vaccines in fact killed my daughter. But they awarded us the largest settlement that has ever been awarded for an infant death case. She died shortly after the vaccine, so she wasn't in any pain. We didn't have any medical bills because she died that day. She wasn't of working age, so there was no lost wages, and so the only thing we could be eligible for was that $250,000 death benefit, and then we ended up settling for $170,000.
I'm going to go and say hi to the mum and the sister.
Oh my gosh.
No, I mean, everybody completely understands. Can you guys describe how Sarah was before this happened to her?
She made my husband want to be a dad. My arms ache because I miss holding her.
It's their favourite pick, and that's why it's going up on the bus.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.